Hey everybody, it's almost time for season 2 of Dragonflight, and it seems like a good time to give out my tips on Mythic Plus. Now, Mythic Plus can be a toxic wasteland with the worst of the worst players kind of running the show, but it can also be a ton of fun if you know a few things and you have the stomach to get through it. I only have a meager Mythic Plus score on this particular character of 2840, and uh, pretty much an alt of every flavor, somewhere around 1,000 or so, and some more. And I've done a lot of keys. I think I've done about 409 according to my Raid.io profile. So, I have a pretty good handle on the way that things work in Mythic Plus, and I've picked up a few tips and tricks along the way that I'd like to share with those of you who are just starting out, and also with those of you who have been playing for a while. And if you follow these tips and tricks, well, I am almost certain that you will boost your score almost instantly. And if you don't, that's really not my fault. That being said, I have 5 basic tips and 5 advanced tips with maybe a bonus tip thrown in. And that'll help you push your score up to where you want to get it, whether that's just getting Keystone Master, Keystone Hero, or I don't know, 3,000 or so. I've done it before. You can probably do it. It's fine. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, number 1, communication is critical. Now, nothing is more frustrating than dropping your key after one wipe or having people argue over routes and strategies partway through the run. Just taking a couple minutes before starting the key to make sure everyone is on the same page is going to save you a ton of heartache down the line. If you just try to finish a key, then make sure everybody knows that. Asking something like, hey guys, I'd like to time this, but even if we don't, I'd still want to finish it. Is everybody okay with that? Is a great idea. And you do also have to have an understanding of what people's goals are as well. Because generally, if you're doing a 21 or higher, people aren't going to do those just to complete them. They're doing those for time. So if it looks like it's not going to happen, don't be shocked that people leave. At the same time, I've been in those kinds of groups where you take one wipe on the first pack of trash because of something minor, and then people just leave. It sucks, but, unfortunately, it does happen. So you're going to have to be prepared, but talk to people ahead of time, get an idea of feeling people out in a non-weird way, and you'll be able to make sure that everyone is aligned to the same goals. Number 2, learn the weekly routes. So there are a lot of tools and guides and all kinds of ways to find these routes. And I'll tell you what I typically do is I will look at Radar.io's news column. They have a feature called the weekly route. This is probably the best place you can go because honestly, they tailor it more or less to what affixes are going to be happening for that week. And they just make it very simple. And if everybody uses close to the same thing, you pretty much don't even have to talk about it most of the time. Generally, the routes on there are the ones that everybody tends to use anyway. So take a look at those. And if you get yourself an add-on like MDT, you'll be pretty far ahead of the game. Honestly, if you're a tank, you really have to know all the weekly routes in and out because people are going to depend on you to run the dungeon and pace things out. So you have to know. This year's MDT, it's a good add-on to have. It just shows you each trash pack, how much everything's worth. And it also feeds into another week aura that tells you more information about your Mythic Plus timer and the percentages and whatnot. So very worth having. I would definitely strongly recommend you grab it. Number 3, learn the new affixes and the levels that they come in at. I'm not going to go super in depth on what all the new affixes are because they're going to probably change still even more. We're only about a week and a half away from the new season, but I would bet that there's going to be some changes coming to those affixes either way. And if they don't come before the patch comes out, they're most certainly going to come after the patch comes out. The good news is a lot of the horrible affixes have been removed this expansion, You know, we don't have to deal with things like inspiring anymore. We actually have gotten some nerfs to some of the other more annoying ones. Like Sanguine is actually going to be a lot easier to deal with this time around, as is bolstering. Instead of increasing the amount of health the mobs have, it's only going to increase their damage, which is great. Get a good idea of how all the affixes work. The basics of it, if you don't know, is that Tyrannical and Fortified will be in every single dungeon, and those swap every week. So 1 week you're going to have Fortified, and it's going to be harder trash, and then the next week it's going to be Tyrannical, and you'll have harder bosses. It's important to know which is which because, well, as a tank, you need to know if you're going to be dealing with harder trash pulls, and you need to save your cooldowns for that, or are you going to be dealing with harder bosses that are going to hit harder, and you have to dodge more effectively. For DPS, the same goes. You're either going to make sure you have a lot of AoE damage up front, or you'll know that you can kind of move more into the single target specs. The other change this season is that 7 and 14 are going to be the key levels in which the new affixes come into play. Not necessarily the new ones, just all of them in general. So you'll get one affix added on at 7, and at 14 you'll get the second affix added on. One of the great things is there's no seasonal affix this season, which should be pretty nice because, I'll be honest, at a certain point, that third affix or that fourth affix tends to be a bit much. So having only 3 this season should make things a little bit easier, but, you know, it remains to be seen what the new affixes are going to do for us and how they'll affect dungeons. Tip number 4, figure out what the dangerous things are in the dungeon. Both trash packs and the bosses are going to have abilities that will either pretty much one-shot you or pretty much ruin the group or just cause all kinds of problems. And it's important to know which of those things are important, which of those things you can interrupt, which ones you can stun, and if there's anything that you need to use other mobs to avoid. For example, in Ruby Life Pools, the Flame Dancers, you had to bring the living bomb on top of to prevent them from getting their cast off. Otherwise, it would pretty much wipe the group on higher keys on Fortified. It's important to know what all these things are and know what you can do to help your group stay alive. As a DPS, you can't just tunnel every single key. Early keys, that'll probably be okay, but the higher up you go, you're going to find that if you're not interrupting, you're going to die. I can't tell you how many times as a healer I've been blamed for people dying because they stood in things like Fell Detonation and Court of Stars. It's a very simple thing. You LOS it, but people don't understand it, and then they blame everybody else without trying to figure out what they're doing wrong. Take the time, be a little bit humble, and just kind of figure out what you need to do to stay alive in a dungeon while also putting out that maximum DPS or heal. Number 5. Be polite and make friends. As corny as this may sound, you'll have a much better time if you are polite and you make a few friends that you can run dungeons with over and over again. You know, just having the same couple of people consistently can make a world of difference in how well you play as a group. And also, it can make a world of difference in your excitement to play the game. After all, it's an MMO, so the social aspect is pretty important. I know there are people out there that are afraid of that, but I mean, you got to get over it. It's an MMO. There's more people playing the game than just yourself. Really, if you do a dungeon and you see that there's a DPS that's doing really, really well, or a healer doing very well, or a tank that's doing really well, go ahead and shoot them an invite on BNet. They may say no, but if they say yes, that's another person that you can whisper and say, hey, are you interested in doing a dungeon? Or when you go to look for groups, you'll see a group that has a blue name in it, and that's somebody that you're friends with, and you know that they're pretty decent. It's helpful to do that type of thing. At the same time, try and resist the urge, though I know it's hard. When you get into a group with some really bad or really rude people, try to resist that urge to talk trash or talk trash back to them, because it doesn't really help anything. The best option is really just to put them on ignore, because once you do that, they're not going to show back up and you're looking for group queue. So it really just kind of solves itself once you put them on ignore. let's all just kind of try to do our part to make things a little less toxic if we can. And now on to the advanced tips. Now, these are the most important things you're going to want to do once you start getting into those 15 and higher keys. They aren't going to be anything too crazy that you can't handle, but they are going to be things that you will have to practice if you really want to get up there and improve. Number one, get to know your rotations and priorities. This is probably the most important tip. You need to be comfortable enough with your rotation that you really don't even need to think about it. The best way to do that is, well, for one, just run a lot of dungeons. The more you do it, the more used to pressing the keys you'll be, and the less you have to think about it at all. On my death knight, I don't even really have to look at what I'm pressing. I just kind of know the timings already without having to look and see what all my buffs are. But obviously, you do want to still have some cognizance over that because some stat changes like haste will change that. But if you don't know what your rotation is, go to a website like Wowhead and look up a class and spec rotation for yourself. These days, they're more of a priority than a rotation. You basically want to be pressing the button that makes the most sense at a time. If you have no idea where to start and you only want to do low keys, you can use a program like Hekili. It's a rotation helper that will show you basically every button that you need to press and what's going to come after that. And it's very useful when you're first starting out or if you have a lot of alts. But you do have to kind of temper that because eventually at some point you're going to have to get away from it and you're going to have to learn the rotation yourself. And it's just the way it is because no program is going to be quite as good as the human mind is when it comes to some things. But that being said, another option, if you don't want to get into a group and practice, or if you just want to, try a couple different talents out and see what the difference is, go ahead and jump into a area in Valdrakken where the training dummies are and just start hitting the training dummies. Go through your rotations. They have a single target dummy. They have a set of AoE dummies. They have ones for healing, and they have one for a tank that'll just hit you until you die pretty much. I'll tell you, as a tank, if you can just sit there and wail on that thing and get to the point where it one-shots you, you're doing pretty well. Make sure you do that because it's probably the most important thing, and there's only one thing that really even comes close to that. Number two, sim and optimize your gear. So this is very, very close to the rotation part of things. Having your rotations down is definitely the most important, but don't overlook how big of a difference that the right enchants and stat balance is going to make for you. Doing a simple top gear sim on raid bots or Ask Mr. Robot can make a huge, huge difference in your overall damage, healing, or your survivability. For DPS, it's pretty easy, really. You just have to pick the top DPS options available. For tanks and healers, you kind of have to walk a fine line between being able to put out decent healing throughput or putting out enough damage in order to hold threat and get the mobs down, and being able to keep yourself and the rest of the group alive. So if you are playing something other than DPS, take that into account when you're doing your sims. But for the most part, you can generally just pick the best item level upgrade that's available to you. And when it comes to stats, take a look at Wowhead, see what your best stats are for a particular type of content, and try to go with that. Number three, plan for and use your cooldowns. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people not use cooldowns, whether they're defensive cooldowns, offensive cooldowns, or support cooldowns. People just tend to forget that they're there for some reason, or they let them linger on their bar for too long without actually pressing the button. Usually, as a rule of thumb, if it's a 2-minute cooldown, just use it. If it's 2 minutes or less, just use it when it's up. There are a few exceptions where it may be worth delaying using a few cooldowns to kind of group them all into one, but those are really few and far between. You can do that a bit more with your 5-minute and up cooldowns, but just kind of think of it in terms of a cooldown not used is a cooldown wasted. If you think about most dungeons, they're going to be somewhere in the 30 to 35-minute range to get through them if you want to time them. And that affords you generally about 6 or 5 casts of any 5-minute cooldown. If you delay using a cooldown for at least 3 minutes, you're already going to lose 1 cast. And that can be a huge difference because some classes, for example, Shadow Priests, have cooldowns that give them a flat 10 or 20% increase to their damage. That's a huge difference and a huge deal. So make sure you're using those and your trinkets as well. Waiting for the perfect moment can seem like a good idea, but oftentimes it's really not. Number 4, use a cooldown and interrupt tracking add-on. Now, you could use weak auras to get the same effect as something like Omni cooldown, and if you want to, that's totally fine. If it works for you, use it. I prefer Omni cooldown personally because it does everything I need in just one add-on, and I don't have to worry about updating specific auras. So what this does, for example, is it gives you a nice, easy box here that'll list all of the interrupts for your group and how much time is left on each of them. This is really helpful for all of those important interrupts that need to happen, where if you see that everybody else's interrupt is down, then you know you need to use yours. It's a pretty simple yes or no question there, but a lot of people kind of screw that up or will overlap their cooldowns in a really frustrating way. The other thing this provides you is it will list out all of the major cooldowns, whether they're defensive or offensive. It'll throw those up on the person's bar, and then you can see who has what, which is also helpful for, if you need to stun a group or if you just want to throw out a defensive to help everybody out. Demon Hunters, for example, throwing down darkness, Death Knights being able to put out anti-magic zone. There's a lot of different options available, and it's just helpful to have. If you're a healer, it's even nice to see things like Death Knights having Purgatory. You know if they're going to have a moment where they're going to die instantly, or if they'll be okay if you screw up a little bit. Number 5, take logs. Now, if you don't know what logs are, what have you been doing with your life? Nah, but for real though, logs are super helpful and probably one of the best things that you can use to improve your gameplay. A simple way to take the logs is if you go to the Warcraft Logs website, you can download the Warcraft Logs companion app. Using this, you can tie this into CurseForge, which you can use to manage your add-ons, and you can have this come up in the game via this little icon down here as long as you're running CurseForge. And what this will do for you is it creates an easy way that you can go in and hit go, and then you'll start logging right away whatever you're doing. You can also upload individual logs, or you can split logs off, but really the only thing you have to care about is live log and upload a log. The other useful feature here is you can go to characters, and if you are in a group, for example, or in a group finder, you can actually see people popping up that'll be right here, and all those people will show their parse, and you can see very quickly who's worth pulling into your group. And that's really very helpful for higher keys when you're trying to push, or if you're just trying to make sure that you do in fact time whatever key you're doing. It is a little bit elitist, but honestly, sometimes that's the way you have to be. Now, the best way to use logs is to upload a log, take a look at the report, and then compare your report, whichever thing you're interested in, whether that's damage being done, healing being done, damage being taken. You can compare your logs to the top person's logs for that particular content that you're doing, and you can get a really good idea of what you can improve on and what you could do differently. So it's a very useful and a very powerful tool. I can't go over the entire process in this video because it would take too long. But if you're interested, throw a comment down below and let me know that you'd like a video on how to read logs. Number 6. So this is our bonus tip. This is really just an overall tip about forming your groups. It can be very tempting to just try and play the meta in every group that you put together, or in every group that you join, or if you're making a character and you just want to play the flavor of the month class. I would recommend not doing that. Obviously, there are going to be some classes that are better than others, Generally, these are things like Prot Paladin from Season 1 of this expansion. Or Prot Warrior has been pretty good. But there's plenty of classes like Blood DKs that do good as tanking. Brewmaster monks can be good tanks as well. Even druids can make great tanks. Really, it comes down to how good the player is. So when you're looking to make a group, look at a more holistic view of things. Look, for example, at people in the group and see what's their raid score or their mythic IO score. If that looks good enough for the key, and it's about the average of what people are for that particular set of keys, then they're probably going to be okay. You could also look at that player's best run, seeing what their best run is. If you're trying to do a 20 Ruby Life Pools and their best is a double timed 20 Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, well, Shadow Moon Burial Grounds isn't nearly as hard as a 20 Ruby Life Pools. So you just kind of have to take some thought about things. And sometimes you can take a risk and it'll pay off, and sometimes it won't. But just look at the whole picture. And like I said before, you can still also look at those Warcraft logs from the Warcraft Logs companion app, and you can check people's parse. If I wanted to look at somebody in particular, we'll say this guy here, Bum Rusher Tichondrius. Well, what a name. I can simply type that in, Bum Rusher Tichondrius, and I can click on that, and I can see everything he's done right here and how he's ranked in that dungeon. I can look at specifically damage or healing or whatever, and I can see based on his damage that, you know what, and the keys that he's done, he's actually done really well. 99 is a really good parse. Not bad at all. So probably somebody worth bringing in. It's worth the time to take a minute and look at these types of things. Don't just try to play the meta classes. You don't always need to have a Prot Pally tank. You don't always need an Evoker or Resto Druid healer. You don't always need to have an Unholy DK to DPS. And you don't need to always have a Demon Hunter DPS. I don't know, whatever class seems to be doing the best. Take who you need based on what you actually need for the dungeon. That's probably the best way to do it. If you don't have a Lust class or a Hero class, get one of those, because you want Lust or Heroism depending on your particular faction. And if you don't have it, it'll kind of hamstring you a little bit. So get that. If you have one type of class, don't try to bring 3 of them, obviously. Try to spread that out a bit so you can have more different varied buffs. Well, that pretty much sums up my best advice for Mythic Plus in Season 2, World of Warcraft and Dragonflight. I wish you the best of luck, and I'll see you out there. But if you have any good tips of your own, please put them down in the comments. And if you like the video and want to see more, go ahead and click that subscribe button and the like button. They're free, and they don't cost you anything. And until the next time, try not to die.